So I hope, I will try to be nonpartisan, but it's hard. It's hard. It's hard. Well, can I just get going, Rabbi Nadav? Can I just start?
Yes, I'm sorry.
No, you don't. I'm saying I've been introduced, so I can go away. You know, I didn't. Rabbi Nadav didn't quite finish my bio. I left NYU 2 years ago after I had a wonderful position at an endowed chair and was able to do great things that I wanted to do. But there was something more important that I wanted to do, and I retired from NYU, and I'm now a professor as part of the State University of New York's college programs to provide college education for men who are incarcerated in a maximum security prison. So I actually teach now for the most extraordinary Torah Lishma. Torah Lishma is that you study Torah, you're learning for no other reason than to study. And my guys, I mean, if you're in prison for life or for 40 years, getting a bachelor's degree isn't to get a degree. I mean, to get a job. That's not why you're doing it. And they're great learners. So I did want to add that piece because that's now a very important piece of my life, going into a prison and teaching there. I'm often asked, well, is there a guard in the room? Because you're with people who are murdered and I say, no, actually, I've never felt safer in my whole life. These guys are such passionate learners. They'll defend me with their life. So that's my work. That's my work now, along with writing. And this book is the book that I published on January 1st of 2021, which was interesting timing, right? Because it talked about the issues facing democracy, and 5 days later, unfortunately, it's always that if only I would have waited a few more days, I've been able to. Same thing now. Unfortunately, the issues of the book remain critical, and so it's being republished with a new interest. Can't you give me until after the election? Right? Because once again, I'm going to write, and so how can I write in a way in the new introduction that makes it sound like I actually knew what happened in the election? So hopefully, my editor came up with some good ideas. So, what I talked about in the Dvar Torah was really trying to ground us in a tradition of Judaism when we think about our role as citizens. It's an interesting thing. If I asked you, how do you feel about a candidate running for president who holds up a Bible in front of a church?
Upside down.
Right. So, and that feels offensive, right? But I'm saying to you, no, when you go into the voting booth, when you are engaged in American politics, I believe we should do it as Jews. So I have no problem with somebody doing it as a faithful Christian, a Muslim, a Buddhist, Hindu. Because as a Jew, when I enter that polling booth, I used to go with my children when they were little. I would take them in with me, and we would say a bracha. We would say a blessing before voting. Because it is an extraordinary Jewish mitzvah to engage in ensuring the health and vitality of the society in which we live. So I want to make the transition, though, to talk about, geez, oh, wait a minute. I feel like I'm not looking at you. I want to talk about what the book is. So the book is Faith, Nationalism, the Future of Liberal Democracy. And my work has been to think about a theology of democracy, and that's a little bit about what you were hearing, but I'm really going to come to that at the end of talking. I want to rather take us through, if you don't mind, share with you the issues of the book that I feel are critical. So the first is the word democracy itself. When we say the word democracy, what comes to mind? What are the expressions of democracy? Demos means what? People, right? So it's the people's rule. What? Rule of the people. So how does that express itself for us here in America? Well, demos is yes, but it's giving power to the people. How do we express it? By voting. And how do we vote in America? Yeah, well, no, not necessarily. That's good too, but how do we vote in America? We vote, and then what happens? The election is over, and how do you determine who wins? In theory, by the numbers of votes, meaning whoever gets 51 out of 100 votes will win the election. That's our system in theory. I understand all different political systems have different ways, but let's say that most of us understand that, because even when we're little kids, if you have kindergarten and the teacher says, okay, let's vote. Who wants to play inside today? Who wants to play outside? The kids already know two principles. One, they get a vote, and two, majority rules. So the idea that the majority determines what happens is one way of thinking about democracy. In America, and a different way of thinking about democracy says majority rules, but what's the but? Minority rights. So it's another way of thinking of democracy, which is, yes, we do have a majority. The majority has a voice, but that majority cannot impose its will on the rights of a minority. In the case of the United States, that's protected by the Constitution, by the Bill of Rights, which was inserted specifically to protect the rights of the individual and to limit the role of government. There's a third way of thinking about democracy, which is we share democracy is a nation, a community, a society, is people who come together, often geographically. Although think about Jews, that wasn't the case with Jews for a long, long time, well, still isn't. Come together, sometimes geographically, sometimes with a shared language, but mainly with a shared sense of culture, of history. They share a vision, an experience of their past, a story of their past. They're sharing a present, and they imagine a future together. And within that is a culture. There are sets of norms and values and experiences and customs and ceremonies that aren't necessarily written down. They just are there. And that's what brings a community together, that we share that. So these are three different ways of thinking about democracy. And for me, what's very interesting in America is all three of these ways are in conflict right now. There's a group that says America is a Christian country. How do we know that? Because the overwhelming majority of Americans are Christian. Yes, there are other groups living here. They have a right to live here, but they're not the majority. The majority has a right to say what are the standards by which we live. And that's what we're hearing now in language that's very interesting for us, certainly very interesting for people of the Bible. This, what in its more extreme form is now Christian nationalism. It's this movement in America of Christian nationalism. It's the illiberal democracy that we hear from Orban in Hungary. And interestingly, America conservatives went to convene in Hungary. Israel sent people of its conservative government for this illiberal democracy, which claims that illiberal democracy means we don't need to abide by the notion of individual rights, of the right of the obligation of the state to protect everybody's individuality and that diversity. In America, it expresses itself in a very unique way, different from other countries, in that the founding of this country was deeply Christian. And the Mayflower Compact that you may have read when you were a kid in school was that America would represent the new Israel, a new Israel that is covenanted with God. That's why so many of the cities, particularly in the eastern part of the country, have biblical names. There was a sense that this is the reincarnation of God's kingdom, and it's in covenant. God will take care of us, will protect us, and we have a covenantal obligation to live a certain way. Our country needs to reflect a certain set of values by which the country will understand what is right and what is wrong. And God will bless us. As a matter of fact, there's even a song written by a nice Jewish guy that says, God bless America. Now, when we all learned that and sang that, we didn't think of the implications. Because what happens if God doesn't bless America? Why wouldn't God bless America? Well, for a significant portion of Americans, actually in this country, about 65% of Americans say that America is a Christian country. An equal percentage say that there has to be a separation of church and state. But for a significant portion, 35-40% of our country, their belief is that the only way this covenant will remain is if we abide by a set of biblical values. How are those biblical values expressed for this segment of the community? Well, things like, even if we can accept and tolerate that what somebody does in their bedroom is their own business, the state can't make sacred, can't sanctify a homosexual relationship. That is fundamentally against God's will. The state can't sanction the murder of babies. Well, right, but for this crowd, yes, they are. That it can't take away life, right? Yeah. So interestingly, yes, a segment. The question is, why is there such a concern for 9 months, and then when the 9 months are over, the concern evaporates, and capital punishment is an example. There's a split, by the way, right? The Catholic Church is very opposed to capital punishment, and they're very opposed to abortion. Evangelicals split on the issue of capital punishment. But my goal for the moment, is not to poke holes in the theory, but rather to understand that for a significant portion of our fellow citizens, their fear is that in America, even if they in their own lives don't abide by the Bible, by the principles of Bible, right, that they understand to be the truths of what correct behavior of citizens should be, even if that they themselves don't do it, they believe the country needs to do that. And if it doesn't do it, it's not about losing an election, it's about losing America. So that's the first thing that I want to explain, that for them, democracy is limited by the rules and obligations to follow a certain set of laws that transcend the laws of the country. And in some ways, the Supreme Court is in some ways abiding by that new understanding. And one of the courses I teach is constitutional crises. And over the last 3 years, I give them a source book, and every year I have to change the source book. because the terms of what I understood to be constitutional law end up failing. So the first point I want to make is that when somebody who believes in liberal democracy, individual rights, human rights, civil rights that need to be protected by a government, say, we're believers in democracy, they are going to destroy democracy, it's a different democracy that we're talking about there. And while I disagree with that democracy, I recognize it exists. And I need to find some way to have a conversation then about how we're going to be able to live in the same country when we have very different ideas about the very core principles of democracy itself. Yeah.
Well, I interject that many of their arguments don't have to do, they're disingenuous. The abortion issue was not really about religion, it's about politics. It was invented, it was manufactured in 1970, the early 70s for political reasons. It was never an issue before that. It was not even an issue after Roe v. Wade until some Republican strategists decided to promote it as an issue. So we don't have to take everything that they're saying at face value.
Right.
They're very disingenuous about what they're professing.
The question is the hypocrisy and the political use of the values we're talking about, whether it's LGBTQ rights, whether it's issues of abortion. I don't want to go there yet. My goal here initially is to understand what's happening. So I'm not speaking as a political advocate. I'm speaking nonpartisanly as a scholar and researcher. I'm not expressing my own political views, and I want to distinguish between understanding, which is critically important, and then the political fights that we're going to have. I want to distinguish between the two. Right now, I'm on this one here of understanding. So the first point I wanted to make is democracy itself. That there is a clear, it's not just in the United States. Israel reflects this as well. Israel, established in 1948, read the Declaration of Independence, as a Jewish state, a few years ago had to pass a law saying Israel's a Jewish state and took away Arabic as an equal language. Why? For the same reason that Modi had to undermine the idea that Muslims ever really had an identity in India. For the same reason that if you are not Muslim, you cannot become a citizen of Saudi Arabia. For the same reason that in Myanmar, the Muslim Rohingya were assaulted, attacked, and forced out of the country. That there is a movement around the world now of asserting a singular understanding of this illiberal democracy, which claims that for a country to be a country, it needs to share in its values, in its symbols, in its religion, in its ethnic identity. And that those who are not part of that may be able to live in the country, but their rights are circumscribed by that of the majority. Obviously, politically, as a Jew in America, I have a stake in this game, right? But right now, it's to understand what's happening. That's the first thought. The second, I want to give a little bit about game theory. Anybody here play Mahjong? Great, good. My wife, 37 years as a rabbi, I have a very large congregation. You know, that's a 24/7 job, right? Just retired and she started playing Mahjong. She's having a good time, right? As a matter of fact, she came home very excited. She won 2 of the games. Came back, we got $1.25. We're going to splurge as a result. So I don't know how to play Mahjong now, but you put out the things, you play, and somebody wins. Then what do you do after that? You what? You play again. Why? Why do you play again? Somebody won. Why do you play again? Because you want to. Because that's the game. The game is not just to win. The game is to play. Right? So in game theory, you play, the goal of a game is for it to be infinite. That game should continue. You play it. Sometimes you win, but sometimes you lose, and that's all right because there's another game that you're going to play. There are specific rules for when you play games. You can read them, and the rules. And then there are unspoken rules. I assume in Mahjong, you're not allowed to get up and look at the other person's hand, right? Or if you're playing poker, you're not allowed to look at the other hand. It's not in the rules. It doesn't say you're forbidden in Monopoly to go take money out of the bank, although that is what I did when I was a kid, right? But it doesn't say that in the rule book because there are norms and values that go with it. So liberal democracy is meant to be an infinite game. There are winners, there are losers, there are real rules, elections, in our case, yes, we have an electoral college, and yes, states have, but there are also informal rules, like everybody should have the right to vote, right? That everybody should be counted. Illiberal democracy has a very different view. The game is to win and to win permanently. The ultimate game is to end the game, or rather to use the game to be able to end participation in the game. So illiberal democracy, and it's a real challenge to our understanding of democracy, because illiberal democracies will use the processes of democracy to ensure its own permanent victory. Right? The idea of to lose a game, it's not losing a game, you're a loser, and nobody wants to be a loser. You've got to win, and you've got to win permanently. And that too is a battle that we're seeing. You read about Georgia, the new election laws there. You read about cleansing voter lists around the country, about who's counted and who's not counted, about illegal people voting, that an election, if I lose the election, the only reason I could lose is because of cheating. That is part of an illiberal, in game theory, illiberal understanding of the game, which is the game is to win forever. And that is what authoritarian systems do. Putin is elected as the president of Russia. He's elected. For that matter, as my son, my family is German. My mom fled Germany as a 17-year-old. So, we brought up deeply immersed in stories. My 5-year-old son would say when somebody said something about Hitler taking power, he said, no, Hitler was elected, which is true. He didn't have a majority, but he was elected as the Chancellor of Germany, right? Using the democratic processes to end the game. So that's the second point I want us to understand what's happening. These are both views of democracy, again, but an illiberal democracy claims only certain people should have the right to make the decisions as to what our country will be. And that's why you hear here enormous language pushing people out, saying these people don't belong, these people belong, these people don't, and if they're engaged anyway, they're cheating. A very interesting, and again, I'm trying my best to be nonpartisan, but when the Republican vice presidential candidate says that the Haitians in Ohio, they're not legal, they're illegal, even though technically by law they're legal, you now are understanding what he's saying. His point is not, no, don't look at the law books, that's not really what matters. What matters is that in this America, they don't belong. I'm not asking anybody to agree with that. I'm simply explaining why, for a significant portion of our fellow citizens, that makes sense. Yeah, well, I'm going to go through a little bit of theory first, and then I'm more than happy to open up how this is playing out. So that is the second point that I want to make. A third point I want to make, actually, I'm going to read something, because I think it's something you really, look, there is no question you are in the You are in the forefront of the battles taking place right now. Y'all know that. I did not choose to come to Wisconsin and to Michigan and to Pennsylvania and Virginia. I didn't pick the names out of a hat. I'm coming because you are in a state in which thinking about how to talk about these things really matters. I want to read to you a section of the book. In 2016, a critic of Donald Trump wrote the following: "Morally, Trump's supporters are indefensible. The white American underclass is in a thrall to a vicious, selfish culture whose main products are misery and used heroin needles. Donald Trump's speeches make them feel good, so does OxyContin." Right? And you heard that in Hillary Clinton's unfortunate line of calling them a basket of deplorables. A really wonderful cultural anthropologist, Arlie Hochschild, she did a study in Louisiana, and I'm going to tell about my own research as well. And she wrote the following: "These people are rebelling against the established elites who see themselves as dutifully standing in line, having patiently waited their turn for the benefits of a globalized world that has never materialized. African Americans and gays and Jews, women, Muslims, right? They've all jumped ahead in line." Now, if you think about it, talking about the rights of trans kid, talking about the rights of Muslims as citizens, or Haitians to be able to be in Ohio, and I, a poor white American, generations of poverty, living in poverty, I'm ignored. My issues are ignored. Who's going to express my anger? She writes, "Many have become discouraged, others depressed. They yearn to feel pride, but instead they feel shame. Their land is no longer their own. Joined at a Trump rally with others like themselves, they now feel hopeful, joyous, elated, and magically lifted. They're no longer strangers in their own land." For those deeply committed, to the principles of liberal America, what did somebody say after saying they're deplorable? They're right. She's right. We do need to understand, though, what is being experienced and what is the huge anger that is being expressed. In America, over the last 10 years, for the first time, other than in war or in a pandemic, a class of Americans was showing an upward mortality rate for the first time. And that was poor white men, meaning men who did not graduate high school or just graduated high school, and then for women as well. And that's in the interior of the country, including in places like Michigan, right? That the death rate went up, and it was called death by despair. Suicide, addiction, right, murder, right, went up. So I want us to understand, and I'm going to tell a story about that as well, but I do want to recognize this other America, which, yes, for those of us who are educated with our degrees, how many of you have a passport, by the way? Passport. A passport. Take a look. In fact, only about 50% of Americans have a passport. So a whole segment of this country is not seeing the world that you're seeing. They're not experiencing the world that you're experiencing, and they don't feel, as a parent, I have 4 kids. My goal as a father was I could drop them anywhere in the world, and they'd be able to make their way. But for a whole segment of this country, that's terrorizing. That we're called anywheres or nowheres. And they want to be somewhere. And there's somewhere they feel is being taken away from them. Their religious values, their cultural values, what they understand to be a man or a woman, what they understand to be marriage, what they understand to be parenting, all of this is blowing up in their faces. And yes, the reality is the Bible Belt has a higher rate of adultery, higher rate of incest. I understand all of that, and I get the hypocrisy, but that doesn't mean that I don't want my world to be a certain way, even if it's not my own behavior, right? We're getting close to Rosh Hashanah.
My argument isn't that they're hypocrites, which they are. My argument is that their arguments of their elites are disingenuous. They are
Good.
making false arguments.
Good. I will get there in a moment because I will talk about Korach. It's one of the most interesting texts in the Torah. But I just want us to feel for a moment. So the genesis of the book was a Ford Foundation grant that I had to try to understand the linkage of religion and politics. On the whole, political scientists, they'll talk about Christianity or Jews or Catholics as a cluster, as like a unit. Religious scholars will talk about beliefs that are varied and interest, right? But very seldom the two come together, but I'm trained to do both. So I was really interested in how the two interact. And I went around the country doing surveys in churches, Catholic, Protestant churches, evangelical, mainline churches. I did surveys and focus groups, meeting with ministers and priests. When I had so I was in Vidalia, Georgia. What's Vidalia, Georgia known for? So if you can imagine, I brought my suitcase to do my work, and then I took my clothes that I had in my suitcase, stuck it in a bag, and filled my suitcase with 50 pounds of Vidalia, Georgia onions that I could take home. That's all there is in Vidalia. So I went to a Covenant of God church in Vidalia. And I had my survey. I had about 150 responses. Almost every one identical on all the core questions, on abortion, on homosexuality, should you have condoms in school, should you teach Bible in school, guns, the whole survey that you would expect. And pretty much everyone answered exactly the same. Right? So I'm thinking, okay, as a researcher, that's great. I can actually not only make a probability statement, I can make a prediction, and I can connect their religion and their politics. The two are influencing each other. I don't know though quite which is which. Then I go into a focus group. Damn, the focus group is more complicated. When I begin to ask them why they have the views they do, the first person who talks, she says, "Oh, I do whatever my husband tells me." But she's playing me. She's playing me because she thinks I've stereotyped the group. Because everybody there laughs. Because they know the last thing in the world that this woman ever would do would be to listen to her husband. And they talk about the complexity of how they make decisions. And they don't sound so different from you. Family, what they read in the newspapers, yes, what they hear in church, but not only what they hear in church, because they read the Bible themselves, right? It becomes more and more complex. They're more interesting than you imagine. And they have, by the way, they have all these ministries. They have ministries of working in prisons. They have food pantries. Right? So after the focus group, they say, "Well, who are you?" So I said, "Well, I'm a professor at New York University. I'm Jewish." And I read the Bible in the original. Well, that's all they needed to hear. Preach, you got to preach for us. Well, I was prepared for that. So this is the section of the Bible that I decided to preach. It's a story you may know. Elijah the prophet is in a cave. And he's desolate. And he's moaning, and he has a monologue. And his monologue basically says, I'm alone, I'm the only one, I'm gonna get killed, nobody cares, everybody has given up, I'm all by myself. And God says, go to the mouth of the cave. He goes to the mouth of the cave. Anybody know the story? What does he hear? What does he see and hear at the mouth of the cave? There's thunder and lightning and earthquake. There's like all these incredible, cataclysmic things. And then a still small voice, right? Still small voice. And it basically says, it's all right, Elijah. You're going to be all right. I'm with you. Elijah goes back in the cave. And he says, word for word. I'm the only one. Nobody cares. I'm abandoned. I'm going to die. Word for word. And I stopped. That's the text I read with them. And then somebody says, I guess in our church, 50 years ago, we taught that God wants segregation. We were taught that the Bible tells us that blacks are inferior and they don't belong. We know that that was wrong. Maybe our children will say to us about same-sex marriage as we now say about our grandparents when it comes to segregation. And then somebody else says, maybe we need more modesty. Maybe we're not the only ones. Maybe we're not the only ones of faith. Maybe we need to recognize other people believe as well. Now, do I think that when you look at the election this year, if you go to look at Vidalia, Georgia, they all will have voted Democrat? No, I don't think so. But I do think there is a bridge of conversation that is possible at this juncture because these are fellow citizens with whom we have to find a way to have conversation. That doesn't mean, now, to the partisan side, that I'm not going to fight very hard for the politics in which I believe. It's only recognizing I got to leave some space. Otherwise, my beliefs, my politics become idolatrous as well. Two more things. One is the text of Korach. You know who Korach is? Korach's, so I'm gonna tell you. That was a rhetorical. Do you know who Korach is? I mean, you don't need to know who he is because it's my job to tell you. No, I know.
That was a joke, but
Okay. So, here's the text. Korach is a Levite. Let's work the context. So he's the tribe of Levi, which is from which there are priests. There's also Levites, but the priesthood comes from them. He betook himself, along with Datan and Abiram, and to rise against Moses, together with a whole bunch of Israelites and chieftains within the community. And he says to Moses and Aaron, you have gone too far. For all the community is holy. Kol ha'ida kulam kadoshim. All of them. And the Lord is in their midst. Why do you raise yourselves above the congregation of Israel? What does that sound like? Step back from how our tradition reads it. What does it sound like? Democracy. It's a very democratic claim. Wait a moment. Exactly, what do you say? Kehillah Kodashah, the holy community. Who is that? That's all of us. So Korach is saying, wait a moment. Why are you putting yourself above everyone? We are all holy. The whole community, all of us were at Mount Sinai. Except he's going to get wiped out. Why? What's going on? I mean, I know the rabbinic tradition on it. The Bible isn't particularly clear. The Torah doesn't say what he did wrong, other than he rebelled against Moses. But he rebelled against Moses by saying, Moses, you've taken out too much. And we know, is Moses a perfect prophet? Perfect leader? No. He doesn't even get to go into the land of Israel, right? He's stuck because he's a sinner too. So why should he be so exalted, right? Anybody? Are we all Korachites? We all buy him, and like he should have won. Moses should have said, "You're right. I'm sorry. We're all holy. Let's." Right?
Korah was listening to God. Moses was listening to God, and that's why he was right.
Who was right? Korah. Moses was, but Moses actually doesn't say anything. Moses backs off. Moses, like, he gives up, like, maybe because, no, I understand Korah gets wiped out, but it doesn't say why. We don't understand what was wrong. I mean, our rabbis are going to explain it, and I think we can understand it as well. What does it mean with somebody who has power? Korah was a leader, and he linked himself to other chieftains, right? And he says, no, we're all here in this. We're going to take power from Moses, who is the person who supposedly God says has authority. At least that's what Moses tells us. Well, our tradition understands this as something very contemporary. Actually, I'm writing an intro to this international journal that I'm co-editing on populism. I'm actually going to use this as the opening, right? Because this is the perfect populist voice, right? The perfect populist voice. I'm speaking for all of us, but the rabbis had no misunderstanding of what Korah was really saying. It was to use that voice, use that language. I'm speaking for all of you. I am a chieftain myself. I'm high up myself. But I'm speaking for all of you, all of you. I'm speaking for you in your name, except what will happen when Moses is overthrown. This populist leader will take over and become the autocrat who Moses is trying, in a sense, not to be. So Korah is the warning for us, as the rabbis understand him, the warning for us that using populist language is an extraordinarily vital way to mobilize people, but you end up mobilizing them for very negative purposes. And I think, again, when we look around the world at illiberal democracy, I think that is what we're seeing in the rise of populism. It's speaking a language of the people, but in the end, by the way, the great articulator of that was Hitler. By the way, what's the most famous car that was produced in that period? Volkswagen, right? A people's car. Hitler used the language of National Socialism, right? The language was the language of populism. The product is not populist, but the product ends up being autocratic, ends up being exclusive. No, so that's the irony, isn't it? The irony is that if I read Korach's line with taking it out of the circumstance of the Torah, and I stood up and I said, well, you said it here, right? When you said the prayer for the holy congregation, all of us. It sounds wonderful. Obviously, context matters. And when we look at the people, the populists of today, Orban, Putin, Modi, I'm being diplomatically cautious in speaking about Israel or the United States, but frankly, I would say someone like Ben Gvir speaks the he's always saying, all of us, we the people. But I think all of us, we the people, understand where he would lead the country, we're able to have more power than he already has, right? And here in the United States, similarly, it's an irony that somebody who is very powerful speaks the language of the downtrodden, suffering, angry, Appalachian folk. It's an interesting thing. Or even the if you read Hillbilly Elegy, right? That it's great writing about telling a story, except as you see its use, where it's gone, one being scratched. Wait a moment, I didn't think that's where it was going to go. So the last point I want to make before closing with the theology side is that we are in a period of the union of three features, and that is my book, which is populism, nationalism, fueled by religious fervor. Using religion, which is your concern, using that religion as an argument for what is a nationalist populist message, which has little to do with the specifics of this policy or that policy, and a great deal to do with power and control. And that is the danger that we're facing, the danger of what, and to us. Why is that a danger for us, separate from the overt things that we're hearing out there, is we are, one, that minority, and two, as a community, we vote overwhelmingly, not even the issue of president, but on social justice, human rights, and civil rights issues, Jews vote more clearly, absolutely, than any other religious group or ethnic group in this country. No different than the poorest black, civil rights activists. Jews, actually, and African Americans are the most politically engaged members of American society. Yeah, well, that this newest line, which is if Trump loses, it'll be because of you. Well, not me. I live in New York, but you, yes. I'm not where I live. I'm not so worried. For you, so that brings me to the last point, which is what I spoke about in the Devar Torah. That for us, yes, this is a pragmatic issue of defending ourselves. There's no question about it. We are vulnerable as a minority community, both a religious, ethnic, national minority community. We are certainly vulnerable, but I want to make, as we would say, a higher argument, the one that I did in the Devar Torah during services, which is democracy, the idea of the incompleteness of the world, the idolatrous nature of absolutism, right? That is at our core. Jews have been vulnerable historically because whenever there has been somebody who says, I am Pharaoh, I am God, my communism is God, my Nazism is God, Jews have said, I would say the little Jew has said, just one moment, not quite. And that has put us in a very difficult position historically, but it is deep in who we are, not just pragmatically to protect ourselves, but deeply theologically as well. To be a Eved Hashem is, we were Avadim Leparo Mitzrayim. We were Eved, slave, right? Leparo. And when we leave, we don't become Eved to some other person or even some other text, but we become Eved to something that's unknowable. And so all we can do is the best that we can to do it right. Not to say we own the only truth, but to do it right. And to do that, we have to participate in the society of which we're a part, which is really why I'm here, is I did not know that on Sunday you're gonna do a get out to vote movement, but I do know that each of you has a role and responsibility as a Jewish citizen, as Jews to participate in America. I'm not embarrassed or afraid. Christians, Muslims, Hindus, but as Jews, you have a stake in this election that is more than pragmatic. It is to uphold core values of what we understand it means to be a Jew and what Judaism's gift to the world is, which is the greater the diversity, that beautiful text, the greater the diversity, the wider the images of God, the more God is going to be present in the world. And that's our task, not to contract and constrict, but to actually widen that as well. So that's the Torah I have. You know, it's Shabbos, so I can't sell my book, damn, you know, that's what I'm told you. But I brought a couple copies to sell tomorrow in Limud, which is a wonderful thing that you're doing here in Michigan as well. That's it. I'm happy. Any thoughts, questions? Yeah, Mir. Oh.
So, looking to understand what you're talking about better, the first the things you were talking about.
That's always a sad. I mean, was I so unclear? No, I'm
So
kidding.
the monocultural democracy, the dismissing other people's voting, being angry and feeling indifferent, how tightly correlated are these, and do they need to be correlated?
Yeah, the sense of loss of needing to fight for place with an absolute views. Do they have to be correlated? Yes. I mean, I can imagine it, but practically yes. Because if you feel, what do you feel you're losing? What is the loss that you have? The loss you have is the absolute clarity. That's the loss, right? What does it mean to wake up in the morning? A lot of my work is on how do we deal with change, right? So the Soviet Union collapses, and the next day you're a teacher of civics. What do you teach, right? So for many Americans, they feel that they're lost. They wake up in the morning, and the world that they believe is their firm foundation is being taken away from them. So yes, I think the sense of anger and loss are connected with a view of the world has to be a certain way for me to be able to. Yeah, Mira.
One quick thing, which is immigration law absolutely codifies the definition of an American as white, male, Christian, able-bodied, and wealthy. It's in our laws really up until like post-Vietnam. Those are how Americans could come in and become American, was defined by those characteristics. So when they say that there's a loss or a change, they're actually right, because the laws really have sort of fundamentally changed since about the late 1970s. That's one thing. But my question is, when you give this talk, not the research, but when you give this kind of talk to evangelical crowds, what kinds of questions do you get from them, or how do you change your talk?
Actually, I haven't done a lot of this type of talks to evangelicals. They're not Jewish. I did my research with evangelicals. I do. Certainly in 2016, I reached out to a number of my evangelical colleagues to ask them, like, what's going on here? You know, because it's a peculiar thing that Bible-believing, Bible-thumping evangelicals would support somebody who reflects all of the sins about which they speak about so fervently. And my close friend, Richie, Tony Ritchie, who's a bishop of the Covenant of God, very, very, very right-wing church, said to me, he said, I'm not voting for Trump, but let me explain. And it's something you probably have heard. But it's something we actually, we kind of know this stuff, we don't want to apply it. King David descends from whom? And who was Ruth? She was a Moabite. According to Torah, you were forbidden to marry a Moabite. Who else does she descend from? He descend from?
Descended from Lot, had sex with his daughter.
Right, so she descended from Lot, incest. Who else does he descend from on his father's side? Another incestuous relationship. If that's not bad enough in terms of lineage, what does he become? What does he do? He's an adulterer. He's a murderer. He's a rapist. And yet, the Messiah is going to descend from him. God works in mysterious ways. God has God's instruments, right? And so, for the evangelicals with whom I talk, they'll say, the person may be disgusting, but the policies from this side are worse. And so we can hold our nose and vote. And I'm not talking about the fervent those I really don't understand. But I'm talking about the thoughtful evangelicals. That's their line. They say, look, this is politics too. By the way, we get it because we voted in 1996, voted for Bill Clinton after the whole, what was her name? Lewinsky, right? After we still voted for him. Why? Not because we thought he was the best guy in the world, but because those policies were policies. We were very pragmatic too. So before we are quick to assault the hypocrisies here, just recognize it's a political decision about what policies will be implemented as well. As for immigration, I just want to say one of the things that's striking that I'm interested in understanding better in the research, based on my own research, is why young Latino and black men are supporting Trump. So clearly, it's more than this issue of who is an American. Something else is going on, and I don't think we have a handle on it yet. I do know that in the prison where I teach, it's all black and Latino. I've had one white guy. Everybody else is black and Latino. And I say to them in my social psych class, I say, close your eyes, and draw for me a picture of an authentic American. And they will draw white, Christian, straight, born in America. So you're absolutely right. But again, that wasn't really law, that was ethos.
Law based on
Yeah, but remember we had many of you all are here because of immigration that opened up for non-white, Jews, Italians, Irish, Greeks, Russians. They were all considered non-white. Certainly the racism against Asians, but I at least want to. I get a bit.
What are the policies that they're?
I think the issues of again, we can talk two ways. We can talk about killing babies and men having sex together and undermining who is a male and who is a female. We can talk about women have the right to control their own bodies, and people have the right to love who they choose, and we have to respect that people's identity as male or female is a right that they have. We can talk about them. They're paralleled but not necessarily intersecting.
And also a black man, or God forbid, a black woman can be president of the United States. I think that when Obama did the White House, that just created, they called it Tea Party, but it was this
Yeah.
huge objection.
I don't want to negate the polarization here. I don't want to negate it. I know that it's there. And like I said, I'm not saying to you how you should vote and how you should use all of your strength to fight for the candidates and the principles that you care about. I'm just trying to pull back for a moment and have you be social scientists looking at the scene, because unless we can find some way of bridging this, we all know perfectly well that on November 7th or on January 21st, we will have chaos in this country as well, endangering all of us, no matter who wins. So I'm saying we've got to think of some way to pull this together. And I would argue it's not just here. Europe is doing that. And God help us, Israel, right now, my wife is hosting in our community the parent circle. Does anybody know what the parent circle is? It's something you don't want to belong to. What's the parent circle? What is it? It is Israeli Jews and Palestinian Muslims and Christians who have lost someone in the fighting. They've come together, one, to connect with each other, and two, to try to imagine a different world. Right? So you've got the polarized fighting, but you've got some people who are saying, okay, I get the fighting, but what are we going to do about it? And that's really what I'm saying here as well. Yes, you need to fight, and you need to fight in this election, you need to fight on election law, I get it. But we also need to think, is there any way that we can bridge some of this, that we can listen and bridge it and say, maybe not they're all the living word of God, but at least I can listen and think of how I would respond. Do you want a battle of who gets to talk first?
She always takes over.
One of the things, I'm loving the talk. I'm loving everything that you are sharing with us. And I'm learning so much. But I would like to give back a little bit. One of the things that Black scholars are pointing out overwhelmingly is the central role that America's original sin plays in our backwards and forwards progress into a journey into the future. And so I've heard you mention all of the triggers, but race is not really, and I don't want to belabor it because I've got my own.
You better not, because if you tried to teach that in Florida, it would be against the law.
That's true. So it's true.
And that just proves her point.
But part of my point
Yeah.
is that you've covered all these other things, but I want us to be sure, not to belabor, but just to be sure that we don't forget that every time something huge happens in the United States, in terms of a major backlash, of societal backlash, race is somehow at the core of it, somehow triggered it. And go back through the history of the United States.
For sure.
And race is in there somewhere.
For sure.
We have to always remember that underneath all of it lies that as well. It's
Yes.
transgender, how families are run, a woman's right to be part of her own body, evangelicalism, all of those sorts of things. But just please remember that that's right there at the core of American society, and it impacts how crazy people get.
Yeah, you know, I on that I have to say, up until recently, you're looking. You tell me when we're ending, Rabbi Nadav. You'll.
I'll tell you. How about it's 10 to 2. How about like 5 to 7?
Oh my God, you guys are very patient. Good. You know, up until a few years ago, when they did surveys on hatreds in America, black, Muslim, gay, those all outrated Jews, which was very distressing because we like to be number one. I would say what's interesting to me at the moment, and I say this as somebody who spent my entire career saying anti-Semitism is not a significant issue, Jews have other things they need to think about, is talking about core hatreds. I am struck that there is some unifying feature now among Latinos, blacks, whites, on anti-Semitism, which strikingly seems parallel. That critical race theory is, we well understand the original sin of America, and it exists. I think it's actually getting worrisomely more diverse and more complicated. As I said, we see a rise in Trump will get significantly more black votes than any Republican candidate since before. Is that?
No, it's like, who would it have?
Yes, so I'm saying, so we're becoming even more complicated. And I would say, though, for us as Jews, we are now suddenly moving into a circumstance that it's not existed for us since World War II. It existed since World War II. Between 1950 and 1980, America had dealt with the Holocaust in ways that expanded civil and human rights across the board. Since 1980, and the question about the Supreme Court, there is a reversing on issues of human civil rights and language being used that, quite frankly, never was, as a political scientist, never crossed my mind would be occurring. And, I'm fighting tooth and nail in this country for these issues of human civil rights, and I'm going to say something I've really never said in a public audience, but I'm, given my family's history, I'm one of these fight, flight person. And we're still in the fighting phase. But I have to say, America has the potential to not be the country that our ancestors came here. My family came here because this was the land of freedom. This was the land of opportunity unparalleled. For Jews, no country in history offered what America offered. And we have to fight very hard to retain that America because the cost to us would be used otherwise. Huge.
So do you have any observations on the public-private distinction? Meaning, I'm saying democracy and public and private, in the sense that when many of us grew up, the biggest action of bringing religion into the public sphere was, do we have to have prayer? Are we going to pray before the football game? Is there going to be a Ten Commandments? I was like, but now, I'm talking to students. At U of M, professor will say, before the next section, we're all going to take a vote. Do we even hear from the speaker because they're connected to a bank that does business with Israel? Although, like 500 other countries, have kids in public schools whose teachers, I don't know any Jewish teachers in the public schools who are like, we need to talk about Israel today to my third graders. Do you know Palestinian, Arab, and Muslim teachers who are like, it's time to bring this into, so I'm kind of curious, with all of your studies of democracy, I'm not on a soapbox, I'm just saying, at least there was a norm about public and private that seems to be questioned in spheres now, and is that just part of the liberal democracy?
Yeah,
it's time to just win.
First off, that I think probably it's been America never was not Christian. For sure, it was never not Christian. I went to public school, and we sang Christmas carols and Christmas stories and all, and public spaces were that. I said between the end of World War II and about 1980, we really pushed in this direction of private. You could be like that poem, the Jewish poem. You could be a Jew in your tent and a man in the street. You could be religious, or as the Secretary of State said, I don't care what church you go to as long as you go to church, which was for Muslims and Jews as well. Yes, part of the polarization is the weird thing of, I'm not going to be able to, our commitment to everybody's individuality has led us to a circumstance where if I'm a Palestinian or if I'm trans or if I'm Appalachia, I have the right that everybody must accept who I am, and I get to write publicly to demand this in all the settings. The idea of who we are as a community, what we are, that's broken down entirely. So yes, if I were a Palestinian now, I'm going to demand that my issue be in the front of everything. By the way, if I'm a Jew, I'm going to demand that as well. If I'm trans, I'm going to demand it as well. That's what I go back and said, for democracy to work, we've got to leave space for individual rights, but we also have to create some type of sense of what is a collective norm and value. It's coming from the left, I understand it. You know, the idea that Bible is going to be taught in schools, or that every classroom has to have the 10 Commandments in that classroom. Everybody's making their demands that this democracy has to highlight their presence. We gotta fight against that, right? Yeah.
I want to make a different kind of point in reaction to
I will.
what you said. And I think a lot of us here wonder why 30 or 40% of the population is going to want to vote for who's like Trump. I'm usually a crazy person, and we're talking about democracy and theocracy, and we're talking about dictatorships. I'll give a simple thing that I think is really the answer to this and the way to look at it. Instead of looking at everything specific and breaking down why this doesn't work, why this doesn't work, why this is a reaction, we're in an age of total confusion. Mass media and information-rich society that most people cannot cope with. They can't cope with the differences. They can't cope with the overabundance of choices. So what does a dictator, potential dictator like Trump want to do? He says, your opinions are important. Your values are important. You are important because I'm going to simplify the world. So there's no longer any more 27 different sexual choices. So there's no longer any choices in terms of religion or culture or groups from all over the world. We're going to simplify your culture the way it used to be. So once that happens and people have very few choices, very few opportunities to make other decisions, they feel comfortable. And in that comfort, they accept an imbecile and a crazy person like Trump.
Yeah, I agree. That is what Make America Great Again is referring to. But I do want to warn us of something. In 1934, there was a plebiscite in Germany to rearm the Ruhr Valley, to rearm Germany, to renege on the Versailles Treaty. And the JFNA of Germany, the Zentralverein of Germany, sent a letter out saying, while we disagree with the anti-Semitic policies, we cannot but want to make Germany great again and must vote yes on the plebiscite. I just want to warn us, right, that we've been in a position before in which we have accepted, okay, maybe we just need to let these changes happen, and it ended up very badly for us. So I do want to, and I think we have one more.
Darrell, do you have a question?
Yeah.
Yes, I understand that you are working in all of your various fields toward having, bringing people together and making the norm that, and making the norms that we consider civilized norms an and the questionnaires that you were giving, asking of the various denominations, the various religions, how would that relate to your grand goal?
Well, as a researcher, you just want to do research. the book reflects my views, so buy the book. But I will tell you, and I can end with this, a really interesting, for me, the most interesting thing in all of my research. So you try to understand what's core. You want to be able to explain the behavior, explain the attitudes, not just correlate them. Obviously, the correlations were clear. It turned out there was one question that was the unexpected correlate in the research. The question, I don't have it here except the question, it was a yes, a one or the other. I believe that the world is filled with sin and evil. And the second was, I believe the world is filled with goodness and hope. And you had to choose one or the other. Overwhelmingly, it's not going to come as a surprise, but overwhelmingly, those who were most consistent in what we would consider right-wing views, both politically and in terms of social behavior, right, chose the first, and those who were the most, liberal, progressive, chose the second. That was unexpected for me. It was, no, because you obviously don't listen to evangelical preachers who speak the language of love and prosperity and God's goodness, right? That's the language they're speaking. But underneath that clearly is a view of the world from which I need to be protected. I need my society to protect me, and I need personally to be protected. Your claim would be, it's the period of change. And maybe that's a fair enough thing to say. We are in a period of extraordinary change taking place. Extraordinary change. If I said to you, how many of you are a man or a woman just like your grandparents? When I ask that, almost nobody raises their hands. In my life, I can go back 17 generations, and in every generation, the men were Viehhändler. They were cattle middlemen. They didn't own the farms, they didn't do the butchers or the leather work. They were the ones, for 17 generations, you could hold your child in your arm and you'd say, when you grow up, you're going to be a Viehhändler. That's all blown apart, right? It's all blown apart. What is the ground upon which we're standing? Well, I'm going to argue people who've sat for 4 hours in synagogue on a Saturday, you've got some sense of grounding. Take that grounding and go and change the world.
Thank you, David. Thanks, everybody.
You said you're mystified by black Latino voters who would vote for, who support Trump. I'm not